Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans CUNY and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and I honestly never ever even dreamed over these past many years that one of my all-time favorite guests would join me here someday, this day in fact, to discuss an historically commanding book, Democracy in America, by the astute 19th century French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville, as well as the commanding contemporary theme of democracy in America. For surely today, this is a theme that must concern thoughtful citizens more than ever before in our nation's past. Surely, too, I never dreamed that today's ebullient and always intriguing Armenian guest would someday grace with his brilliant afterword the new Signet Classic edition of my 1956 abridgment of Tocqueville's classic work. But he has, and even as this program makes its public television debut, our newly revised book does as well, which makes me all the more pleased that my learned friend Vartan Gregorian, historian, librarian, educator, university president, foundation chieftain, now head of Carnegie Corporation of New York, joins me once again today, this time to discuss Democracy in America, the book and the reality. Of course, in The Road to Home, my guest's enchanting memoir of his extraordinary life journey from the Armenian quarter of Tabriz in Iran to the pinnacle of American intellectual and cultural achievement, he notes that in his early years as student and teacher at Stanford University, two books offered him particular insights into his adopted country, the Federalist Papers and Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And I would ask Vartan Gregorian first and foremost about Tocqueville. Indeed, as I look at the afterword that he wrote in the book just coming out, I note that he says, "After all, Democracy in America is not just the title of a book written by a visitor who passed some time among our forefathers and then went home. It is a great notion, a living, breathing ideal, and a work in progress that all Americans are in the process of creating together." And Vartan, I guess that's the essence of your feeling about Tocqueville.
Well, Tocqueville, I think, work will remain with us, even though it's antiquated in many ways, but not the spirit and not its analysis. Because as I wrote in the afterwards to your wonderful edited book, when Tocqueville wrote his book, it was early phase of American history, first of all. There was no civil war yet, the worst tragedy to befall our country. There had not been World War I. There was no American empire. There was no World War II. There was no concept of utopian socialism was emerging. There was no totalitarian concept of totalitarianism. There's no concept of Orwell. There's no psychology, mass manipulation techniques. There was no mass propaganda techniques. Our population was very small, rural, But now we're facing 350 million Americans soon to be, more urban, more diverse, more fast-changing. But none of this deterred from his main analysis, which is one of the things I like about de Tocqueville, when he coined the term individualism to describe the American character as distinct from Europe. That in America, in the new individualism, a new society was being built, in which Americans were individualistic, but not necessarily self-centered. So the individualism was a new phenomenon whereby individual Americans could defer their personal gratification for the sake of community, for the sake of how to combine public good and private good. He thought the two were compatible, and that individual liberty was very important. That's one of the reasons why, by the way, speaking of France and Tocqueville, French liberals, Republicans, were horrified about the American Civil War, that it will completely destroy American democracy. That was the source, origin of why they sent the Statue of Liberty to us. It took so many years to get here, so many things even to be mounted. But it was important for all Europe to pay tribute to a new country in which freedom and liberty and democracy could be preserved. So America was best hope for, according to them, best hope for mankind, for experiment for democracy. That's why I ended my afterwards. There's an ongoing, evolving phenomenon, democracy. It's not a frozen category. It's not a catechism. You do this, you do that. Because it demands engaged citizenry.
But it's interesting, you say the emphasis on the individual, but not a self-centered emphasis. Explain that.
Well, self-interest, it dominated Europeans phenomenon. Americans, because of mutualism, self-help, helping your neighbor, do everything, don't expect others to do for you. There was self-dependency. Society depended on itself, improving itself. You did not have to say, like in Soviet Union, I don't have to clean the garbage in front of my door because I pay taxes. Or even here, it's city's business. Americans were in charge of their lives. He welcomed all the non-profit organizations, or volunteer organizations, as first signs and manifestations of participatory democracy. You are engaged in the system. You are not only engaged in yourself. It's a fascinating phenomenon that he built on his whole thing: American self-reliance, American entrepreneurship, America's resiliency, America's go-get, do it. And also, he did not even mind the fact, that all of them were detached from education, by the way. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. He never deals with American universities, American higher education. There wasn't much, maybe, at the time to brag about to Europe. But America, despite all of those shortcomings, he felt a constitution was created in which freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of individual were going to be preserved.
Vartan, did your feelings about Tocqueville stem in any degree, important degree, from your own experience as a young man coming to this country?
Two things impressed me when I came to the United States, mostly, I should say, initial term. One was Elmer Davis, one of the first paper books I read because I could afford to buy, not because of ideological reasons. The title was, "But We Were Born Free." It left a great impression on me that individual had rights, individual could defy the whole system. Second one that impressed me, I was in a line in Nebraska, arriving to from California to New York. I was standing in Howard Johnson, one of the hotel restaurants, and I looked behind me, there was a colonel. So I said, "Please, after you." It was instinctive authority. Power goes before individual. he told me there is a line. There was a law. Law transcended individuals. And that was very important concept, maybe very, silly for many people, but for me, it was an eye-opener that where I came from, important person went ahead of it, regardless of how long you've been waiting for them, because that was the norm. His important, power is important. Law did not equalize opportunity or situations. And de Tocqueville always has been with me in terms of his notion of individual, how it relates to the system, how system is there to protect public good and private good, reconciliation of public and private.
Do you think that one could come to this country today? After all, you came here, was it 56?
1956, August.
When my first edition of Tocqueville came out.
I did not read your edition, by the way.
Sorry, dear. But do you think that you would feel that way, that someone coming from Europe today would feel that same way?
I don't know, because as a historian I cannot project, but I can just analyze what I know. I tell you one thing that worries me. Great deal of de Tocqueville's emphasis on liberty, freedom. We have put more emphasis, America's land of opportunity in terms of economic well-being, to make money. Mm-hmm. That's what worries me, that people will come here, whether they're concerned as much of being citizen, enjoying economic, not only economic opportunities, but take part in our society, intellectual and cultural quest. Whether they come, their children will be, whether they like or not.
But why does that bother you?
It bothers me because, again, it bothers me because America is not just for money and economic well-being, but it also has certain ideals. I want people to know about our Constitution, the fact that they have rights. They're here as citizens. It's almost like Roman Empire in the best sense of the word. When you are a Roman citizen, you have rights. That our arbitrary power cannot destroy those rights in any other totalitarian, authoritarian. So Tocqueville had no notion of totalitarian, authoritarian, that autocratic societies, but not totalitarian societies or totalitarian ideologies.
Does this feeling give you, make you more sympathetic to the libertarian movements of our own time?
No, because again, it's nice to have fewer people. You can be libertarian, less government, and so forth. But when we had civil war, it required passive organization on both the part of South and the North. They did not say, let's have less government. Let's not. All libertarians, everybody, exclude the army, armed forces, which is one of the major government-run organizations. World War I, you had to mobilize. World War II, you had to mobilize. Massive government. You have institutions which require educating masses, public health and others, to live at minimum organization. Now 50 states, is very difficult. We have a political system that is 19th century, Tocquevillian in a sense. We have political realities which is 21st century, sometimes making the structure cumbersome, how to move, how to act, how to solve our problems. And that's one of the things that Tocqueville never anticipated. That libertarians, it's easy. You can say, I'm a libertarian, I don't believe in this and that, less of everything, no taxes, less government, and so forth. But how do you then organize the country? Let's say we have Soviet Union, what do you do? They say, well, we have less government, don't have CIA, we have less government, don't have Defense Department, we have less government, don't have broadcasting, USIA, don't have this, don't have... During the Tocqueville's time, or sometime, the State Department, I think, had 17 employees, all right, or 20, or something like that. But not thousands, because, again, we live in a very complex world in which we did not complicate them. The world has complicated us, whether we can resist all the trends or not. So I'm just saying, de Tocqueville was not libertarian. That's why he loved the Constitution, because it balanced public and private interests. And there is role for state government, there's role states' rights and all of that. But that vanished after Civil War made federal government much more stronger in a sense than states.
What about his concern for the so-called tyranny of the majority?
Well, that's always been the case of all the liberals. As a matter of fact...
you say that disapprovingly?
No, approvingly. It's always there. Tyranny of majority is complicated also tyranny of ignorant majority. Because sometimes that's why organization I preside over, Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, thought education is the source of strengthening democracy by educating the public. If you have educated citizenry, a different situation than uneducated citizenry that you can move through sentiments and so forth, propaganda and others, at complicated times like this. So de Tocqueville, Bertrand Russell later, same thing, Minority of One. That was the name of the publication of Bertrand Russell. Societies are known how they treat their minorities, not how they treat their majorities. That's where liberalism comes. How you treat minority, because otherwise tyranny of majority is reality. In the name of majority, you can outlaw anything you want. I hate to tell you, Hitler came to power to parliamentary mechanism. In a very well-educated country, Germany.
Yes, you say in a very well-educated
Very well-educated. So the danger is not just a lack of education. The danger is also, as I mentioned, mass manipulation, mass organization, marriage of nationalism with a totalitarian ideology can produce marvelous results for those who want to dominate society.
You know, I notice you've said a couple of times now, and in all our previous programs, there's always a mention on your part of manipulation.
Yes.
This is a real concern of yours, isn't it?
Very much so. When de Tocqueville wrote, when Orwell later, 1984, wrote, they were concerned that all truths will be accepted, all facts will be accepted as facts.
Not so.
Not so. You have Orwell came already how to manipulate the language in such a way that words don't mean what they're supposed to mean. How to use psychology, mass psychology, in order to steer emotions, movements. Look at the Teddy Roosevelt period. Look at Hearst newspapers mopping up the sinking of a battleship in order to invade Cuba and so forth, to do away with Spanish rule and other things. We can easily move masses. It's minorities sometimes who have to defy those, and they have to be protected. That's why we have always going to have heterodoxy and orthodoxy in terms of ideologies. Heterodoxies come, outlaw or push out orthodoxy, then they become orthodox themselves to something else. We need open society in which all things are criticized, all things are challenged, because democracy is not a fixed phenomenon. It provides means to improve, but also as sometimes seeds to deceive it.
You know, there was some time back, the BBC did a series of films on Freud and his nephew in this country, Edward L. Bernays, and the whole beginning of taking Freud's insights into the nature of human nature and exploiting them.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we're in the midst of that now.
Yeah, all over the world, you can exploit religion, which is supposed to preach tolerance, by making it unique, transcendent, and you make it not absolute. Religion becomes absolute. You make nationalism, who's the best, we are, and marry it to who's threatening us. You can build all kinds of forces around that in which individual voices are silenced because democracy marries sometimes or embodies, contains also nationalism, a religion which is absolute. I told you last time we were here that I've attended many interfaith meetings, and de Tocqueville also did not emphasize the importance of religion. That's why I'm dragging all these things. And during these discussions, I summed up the following. They're all Muslim, Jewish, and all kinds of Protestant, Catholic, and others, Buddhist coming together. They all say, I summarized the following way: brother, we both serve the Lord, you in your way and I in his.
I in his.
In his. There's absolutes. Here is a religion which is supposed to tolerate, but tolerance is not enough. Understanding is important. You can tolerate things and not deal with them. And therefore, tolerance is integral part of liberalism, in order to understand. But that's only halfway. The other thing you have to understand in order to know why you're tolerating it. It's not a legal phenomenon. It's also a societal problem. If you have a minority of ideologues, be it conservative, radical, it does not matter. You're tolerating them, which means I'm putting up with them. But you're not engaging with them. The importance of ideology, especially libertarianism, conservatism, radicals, Marxists, liberals, neoliberals, neoconservatives, is people to be engaged in discussion if democracy has to have a common vocabulary and common purpose and constantly improve itself and constantly adjust itself.
Are you, I was going to say optimistic, but I know better than to ask you about that. Mm-hmm. Are you hopeful in terms of seeing in the future this dialogue going on, this conversation?
We have mostly, in many instances, monologues.
Yeah.
The most dangerous thing that I've encountered recently, when people say, I have my facts, you have your facts. Namely, there are no such thing as objective facts. If we reach that stage, then you can have competing societies with competing facts, competing footnotes, and others. They confuse interpretation, opinion with fact. Facts always can be found. Historical fact, when did this happen, 1832 or 1833? You can't say, I believe it was 1834. Facts happen, who was president of the United States. That's a fact, that's not an opinion. But you can interpret others through opinion and others. But that's be challenged, not overcome and undo facts. And that's one of the reasons, for example, I'm not a catechism-oriented. Let's have our textbooks, the following things that we include. But you have to discover. One of the things when I read Tocqueville, I just also encountered Shelley's The Critic, 1799, which left a great impression on me. One line said, the number of those who undergo the fatigue of judging for themselves is precious few. It's the role of education to increase the number of those who undergo the fatigue of judging for themselves. And the Tocqueville's democracy or democratic system should enable, give the tools, education, for people to become independent-minded rather than become copies.
But I think it was Learned Hand who talked about the hardest work of all, thought, which is what you're saying. How do we get ourselves to deal with that in a positive way when everything around us is aimed at making things easier? From kitchen utensils to communications devices which concern you, I know.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, I don't have a clear answer on that because people are debating that. Main thing is everybody wants everything in America to be light. Mm-hmm. Thank God they're not making also scientific discoveries, light discoveries, heavy discoveries, and others. Because our culture now more and more tends to entertain. It doesn't mean that you have to teach science, be boring. It does not mean that you have teach history, you should be boring. But everything is not fun. Everything is not entertaining necessarily. Life is a very serious business. It has entertaining moments, it has sad moments, it has tragic moments, and so forth. So how can you teach everything light? I mentioned some time ago that I was present at the discussion where somebody wants to make Encyclopedia Britannica light. Well, something in America should be heavy, because, my God, we're dealing with thousands of years of knowledge and wisdom and this, American philosophical traditions, America's literature and other. We should know what it is and take light aspects, if there are, and heavy aspects, but not say, let's make it light in order to make it popular.
But you
it
know,
almost reminds me of 50 Great Moments in Music by Milton Cross. You know only opening lines, so therefore it's Beethoven. Now let's go to Mozart. That doesn't make you a knowledgeable individual. It's actually an insult to Beethoven and others that you have remember one line. It did not lead you to hear the entire fifth or third and symphonies.
there was a story that I knew I shouldn't tell you before I ask you if you would write the afterword to this Democracy in America. And that was the realization that many of my colleagues have said. My introduction to it is pretty good. Even if you didn't introduce yourself to it at first all those years ago to this edition. Now I find, and my colleagues tell me, many students read only the introduction because it's Tocqueville light.
Yes.
And this is something that I relate to when I read about your concerns about communications in our time.
That's very important observation. But I always, when I was teaching at San Francisco State, a publisher need not be mentioned, and when I was teaching at Texas also, Intellectual History of Europe, they came to ask me whether I would underline the textbook, a textbook they were writing. What should people read in order to get A? What should they read B in order to C? I said, my God, why don't we just have one 10-page guide?
Vartan, that's what we're getting to, and I'm being told that we have no more time. But thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for your time.
And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope that you'll join us again next time. Meanwhile, as another old friend used to say, good night and good luck. And do visit the Open Mind website at theopenmind.tv. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans CUNY and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.